If you still think of Japan as a nation defined by restraint, caution, and stability, you might want to look again. The 17th of April 2026. In the early hours of the morning, a Japanese destroyer cuts through the waters of the Taiwan Strait. The date is no coincidence. It marks the anniversary of the Treaty of Shimonoseki, signed after Japan's victory in the First Sino-Japanese War. Even more striking, the year 2026 is the year of Bingwu in the Chinese sexagenary cycle, a cycle often associated with upheaval. This echoes the Yawu year of the First Sino-Japanese War. The air is thick with provocation. The 20th of April 2026, the South China Sea, Japan arrives with live ammunition and combat-ready troops in the most sensitive waters on the planet. This is no longer a symbolic rescue drill. This is the real thing. Blockades, strikes, joint combat operations. This isn't just an exercise, it is a signal that Japan is moving with full intent toward the edge of the battlefield. Which brings us to the question, what is Japan actually trying to achieve? Where exactly is it headed? If we zoom out, if we look at the long arc of history since the end of World War II, you'll realize that for decades, Japan has been focused on one singular mission. It is trying, finally, to become a normal country. What exactly is a normal country? It is not about how powerful a nation is. It is about whether it possesses the full range of sovereign capabilities. To put it simply, it comes down to three things. Can it decide for itself whether or not to go to war? Can it guarantee its own security without relying on others? And can it chart its own diplomatic course independently? If a nation cannot do these things, then no matter how developed its economy or how advanced its technology, it is not, in the fullest sense, a normal country. But the real question is, why isn't Japan one? The answer takes us back to the aftermath of World War II following its defeat. Japan was completely reshaped. Its constitution renounced the right to wage war. Its military capabilities were strictly shackled. Its security architecture became deeply dependent on outside forces. In other words, Japan did not evolve naturally into what it is today. It was designed this way. Since then, every Japanese leader from the left or the right has shared a quiet singular obsession. They have all been trying, piece by piece, to turn Japan back into a complete nation. Look at the history. Nobusuke Kishi tried to reshape the security alliance. Yasuhiro Nakasone sought to strengthen national identity. Junichiro Koizumi pushed for overseas military missions, and Shinzo Abe openly championed the goal of normalization. Their paths were different, but their destination was the same. The question has never been whether Japan wants to change. The question is, can it? Many people believe Japan is just one small step away from its goal, but in reality, it is locked within a complex, rigid structure. I call this the Eightfold Shackles of Japan. Legal, a constitution that paralyzes military action. Military capability exists, but the system is not independent, diplomatic, deeply, perhaps inextricably, bound to an alliance. Historical, a lingering wall of mistrust from its neighbors. Economic, a massive reliance on external markets' energy, a total vulnerability to imported fuel resources, a supply chain with its neck held by others. Demographics, a shrinking, aging population that drains national vitality. You see, Japan isn't just missing one specific piece of the puzzle, it is being held back by an entire system, acting all at once. So, how do you break through these constraints? Can it be done through the economy? If Japan simply becomes wealthier, does the problem go away? No, because the security structure remains the same. The rules don't change just because you have a larger balance sheet. What about technology? Can technological leadership provide an escape? In theory, yes, but it would require a game-changing breakthrough, something powerful enough to rewrite the global order. And right now, Japan doesn't have it. How about diplomacy? Can Japan simply negotiate its way out? That too is incredibly difficult because the rules were written by the powerful. More specifically, they were written by the United States. In this system, Japan's friendships require American approval. At this point, you begin to see a cold, hard fact. Under the current rules, almost every rational path leads to a dead end. There is no simple solution. So when does the opportunity for change finally arrive? The answer is simple: when the rules themselves begin to fail, or have already failed. History shows us that every major structural shift occurs during moments of chaos, war, crisis, the collapse of order, the redistribution of power. Therefore, for Japan to truly become a normal country, the most realistic path doesn't exist within the rules. It exists at the moment the rules are rewritten. To put it even more bluntly, it is not that Japan isn't trying hard enough. It is that under the current world order, there is no solution. Now, let's look at the global landscape. Europe, a prolonged, grinding conflict. The Middle East, continuous instability. East Asia, tensions are reaching a boiling point. In the midst of these multinational exercises in East Asia, the most striking detail isn't the scale. It is the shift in Japan's role. In the past, Japan was a supporting actor relegated to the rear in a strictly non-combat role. But look at what Japan is doing now: deploying combat units, carrying live ammunition, participating in blockades and strike operations. Add to this a radical shift in their weapons export policy and the steady expansion of their military footprint. In short, Japan has moved from the shadows of the rear to the center of the stage. It is no longer a bystander, it is stepping over the line and walking straight into the center of the ring. To understand Japan's behavior, you first have to recognize the three states of the world. The first, stability. There is friction, but the rules hold. It is like an argument where no one ever throws a punch. In this world, Japan is locked in. The second, confrontation. The punches are flying, but the table hasn't been overturned yet. Total competition paired with localized conflict. For Japan, this offers some room to breathe, but no real freedom. And the third, disorder. A world where no one is in control, where the rules themselves begin to dissolve. This is the window Japan has been waiting for. Disorder isn't just about whether there is a war, it is about whether anyone is still capable of maintaining the status quo. Looking at the world today, Japan has decoded three critical signals. First, American hegemony is fading. Second, because of that fade, the US needs Japan more than ever before. And third, China is strong, but not yet strong enough to dictate the new rules. When you add Japan's own domestic pressures into the mix, taking this step becomes an inevitability. Japan needs it, America needs it to some extent, other nations need it too. Even China, in a strange way, might need it as a justification for its own next move. It sounds absurd, doesn't it, that a march toward the edge of conflict has become a win-win scenario that everyone, on some level, requires. At this point, you might be wondering, is this risky path just a choice made by the government? Does the Japanese public actually support this? It is a fair question, but the reality is quite clear. What we are seeing is the collective will of Japan as a whole. Certainly, there are citizens who disagree, but the key fact remains: the policies are moving forward and the actions haven't stopped. In the Japanese political system, the prime minister is rarely on solid ground. In fact, Japan is famous for how frequently it changes leaders. The 10 prime ministers in 10 years phenomenon, where one takes office today and resigns tomorrow, is nothing new. If there were truly overwhelming public opposition to this direction, the result would be swift. The prime minister would be ousted, and the policy would be scrapped. But that hasn't happened. The conclusion, then, is unavoidable. This direction has become an accepted consensus within Japanese society. It might not be the ideal path, but in their eyes there is no better choice. Japan may not necessarily want the world to fall into chaos, but it understands one thing perfectly: only in chaos does it have the chance to change its position. Because in a world of stability, Japan can only waiting for what? Waiting for the decline of a superpower, specifically the United States, waiting for a strategic withdrawal. But that kind of waiting is passive. It is a hostage to time. Once the world enters a state of upheaval, however, the situation changes completely. In times of turmoil, Japan isn't guaranteed to win, but it finally has an opening. An opening to gain leverage, a voice, and the room to maneuver. As the situation in East Asia unfolds, other nations may find themselves reacting, driven by events beyond their control. But Japan may be more proactive, more aggressive. We cannot rule out actions that push beyond existing boundaries, or even intentional accidents designed to force a new reality. This isn't just something for Japan's adversaries to watch closely. It is something its allies should be wary of as well. In reaching these conclusions, we aren't underestimating the mutual dependence between the United States and Japan. But when faced with the ultimate temptation of true freedom, the choice becomes self-evident. If we look at their cultural DNA, Japan has a long-standing tradition of Gekokujo, the spirit of the underdog, overthrowing the superior. Yet, they are also a people of immense endurance and patience. You can see this in the reverence held for the saga of Tokugawa Ieyasu. It is the ultimate study in waiting for the perfect moment. Looking at history, Japan carries deep and uneasy memories with Russia, China, and the United States. It is a striking irony that these three nations are the very pillars of the current global order. When a nation that has endured in silence for decades finally decides that its waiting is over, the world should take notice. Can the great powers still control the board? Perhaps the most unsettling realization is that the danger isn't Japan itself. It is the reality of a world losing its order. In the end, great powers have their grand strategies, but smaller nations have their own calculations. And right now, Japan is executing its own. And finally, if the opportunity truly presents itself, a vacuum of power, does Japan have the capacity to take that final step instantly? Does it already possess what we might call threshold capabilities, including the potential for nuclear armament? If the world truly descends into disorder, who will emerge as the new dominant force? Will China become the next hegemon? My assessment is probably not. Perhaps it isn't ready, but more importantly, it doesn't want to. As for why, we'll explore that question in our next episode. Thanks for thinking with me. If you enjoy exploring ideas like this, you might consider subscribing. I'm hoping this channel might slowly gather a small group of curious minds who enjoy thinking about the world together.